Sorry, I'm just seeing some of the messages in the chat, which is just hilarious. I see one that says, "In 1 minute, my Marxism will officially become cultured." Oh, that's so funny. That's Damon Garcia.
Damon.
Damon.
Damon's amazing.
Damon's a buddy.
Oh, he's fucking great. I love that channel so much. Oh, we actually went live. Brilliant. Oh, okay, Streamlabs is working. You never know what you're gonna get with Streamlabs, but anyway, it's working out. It's working out well today. How are you getting on, comrades? Good to see you all there. Today we are joined by the mighty, the ferocious, the brilliant academics. We have the mighty thelitcritguy, John.
Oh, hey.
Yeah. That was like a cue thing. I should have had like a little note or something like that there. But yeah, and we're also joined by laborkyle as well.
Hello, how are we?
Cue for you
On this interesting. It's just been interesting. I'm in the United States. It's been an interesting day.
Yeah. We didn't really plan out the dates for this particularly well. I'm afraid I forgot
That's
that
on
today.
me.
No,
For the record, that's on me.
it's entirely
I'm
on
the
me.
American. Oh, no, it's not. I should have remembered that.
Well, will we? Do you want to vent before we get started? Do you want to vent anything about the elections? Now's probably your time. Let's just get the election stuff out of the way. Is there anything you want to say about this? Your frustrations, your excitements, your hopes, your wishes, your dreams, whatever it might be. Anyway, if anyone wants to say it now's probably the opportunity to do it, and that goes for people in the chat as well. How are you feeling about it at the moment, Kyle?
I think that's a good idea. It's just to sort of get it all out of the
Yeah.
way. Just, if I can sum it all up as best as I can. Fuck the bourgeois dogs. All power to the working class. End of speech. That's it. I don't know what else to say.
Fucking yes, absolutely. Brilliant. Okay, thank you very, very much. Brilliant. I do want to just do a little shout out to everybody I see in the chat there. So I see Conrad Roman, Martin Barakov, Jesse Daya, The Partisan, Socialist Swan, Damon Garcia, Ben Toth, Will Turner, Frank Lopez. Harry's getting on. Thanks for being with us here today. It's going to be a really, really interesting stream, and actually somewhat relevant as well to anybody who's been keeping an eye on this channel. You'll notice that I've started doing a series confronting the far right in Ireland, the growing, burgeoning far right, which we're seeing at the moment, and actually, I got accused. Hey, I hear that beer there. Good stuff. That's you, John, isn't it?
That was me, actually.
Oh, that's you, Kyle.
Mine will be in like 10 seconds. Don't worry.
That's what I like to hear.
3 p.m.
Cheers. 5 o'clock somewhere, as they say. But anyway, yeah. So I got accused. I actually got accused of this, of being part of this cultural Marxist conspiracy, this international conspiracy. I got called lots of names. I got accused of being part of cabals. I got accused of all kinds of nonsense. So it's going to be relevant today that we're going to be sort of addressing cultural Marxism, this strange far right conspiracy theory that exists, and then we're going to actually get down to what is Marxist cultural analysis and what it actually is, and how incredibly distant and far removed it is from that strange and bizarre conspiracy theory. But before we do that, let's just do a quick round of introductions where our guests can describe themselves, the backgrounds, their work, including social media work, maybe a little bit about their political development over the years, and so on and so forth. So let's go through one then the other. Let's see. So we were just talking to Kyle. So Kyle, would you like to get started with a little introduction there?
Sure. I'm not known for being brief, so I'll do my best. My name is Kyle. I go by laborkyle on just about everything. I have a YouTube channel where I like to talk about theories of philosophy, particularly in the 20th century, and I talk about video games mostly as a form of cultural analysis. That's sort of the mode of inquiry there, but I'm also interested in all kinds of other stuff, mostly political history. My training is as a historian. That's what my degrees are in. It's what I went to school for and mostly what I write about. But the theoretical space has always been something I've been interested in. And the other thing that I've always really thought of myself as is I've been at varying levels and in various sort of places, an educator for a little while, through all kinds of different mediums. And I just love teaching. It's something that I've always been very passionate about. And so I wanted to figure out a way to do it in an online space, and that's what all of this kind of turned into. I also like to I stream on Twitch sometimes and just hang out and talk with people. But yeah, that's I would say that I live in Florida in the United States, with my husband and dog and cat, and I'll never stop. I'm bad at ending things. I'm notorious for, so I'll just end it
Me
there.
too. Me too. Wait till we come to the end of the stream properly, and I'm trying to like figure out a way to say goodbye and to end the stream, and like I'm so awkward. It's like, so are we finishing now? Yep, yep, yep. Should we do like a slogan? Should we do a slogan? Solidarity, comrades.
I need someone with a giant cane to come and pull me off by the neck.
It's like in Ireland. In Ireland, we can't say goodbye. If you're ever talking to someone on the phone in Ireland, it's always just bye, bye, yeah, cool, bye, 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 just over and over and over for a solid 3 or 4. Oh, and how's your mom? How's your dad? How's your how's your dog? Okay, oh yeah, bye, 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 bye. You there? You still there? Bye, 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 bye. So I don't know. I think there might be some Irish blood in you there.
Oh, I know for a fact I do actually.
Oh really?
Yeah. My mother's family, is again, the historian thing means you get access to well, I mean, most university students, for the record, have access to like genealogical search engines and sources and stuff. So sometimes classroom projects turn into actually, yeah, that sort of a thing. Sorry, I'll talk about genealogy. Historians will ramble and also talk about things like genealogy.
Thank you very much, brilliant. And John, would you like to introduce yourself to everybody here as well?
Yeah, absolutely. How is everyone doing? My name is John. I go by the thelitcritguy pretty much everywhere on the internet. I basically feel like Kyle stole a lot of the shit I was just about to say, but that's fine. We have a lot in common. Like him, I really like teaching. My background was in literary studies. For a long time, I've done like criticism and theory online. I make YouTube videos very occasionally, and I am an unreformed poster at heart. I'm also the co-host of the podcast Horror Vanguard, which is a podcast about horror movies and communism, and why both are great. And we talk about film, we talk about radical theory, we talk about kind of a politicized critique of capitalist culture. Yeah, I do a lot of writing online. I do a lot of kind of teaching in online spaces. I kind of grew up as a sort of like apolitical lib, I suppose. But as soon as I realized that I grew up with a parent who was a social worker and a grandfather who was a miner, I was very quickly radicalized. You know, I started teaching at universities. I got in trouble for teaching the Communist Manifesto, and
Amazing.
it was a class on like literary analysis. So I got my students to read a section of Engels' Conditions of the Working Class in England and the Communist Manifesto. And
John's based as fuck. If people didn't realize, people don't know. Like John is so nice and British and like even online, like he'll dunk every once in a while, but like he's just a very sort of like approachable person, but like John is based as fuck. Y'all like I hope everyone can learn. I'm very privileged to know this truth, like to be being a friend of yours. Anyways, I'm sorry, I had to. Like,
I'm gonna be super. Like, Kyle does this to me because he knows that, like, for my sins, I have to confess to being from England. Which is obviously bad. Ooh. Which is obviously just a bad thing to be.
Yeah, end the stream there. No. I'm only fucking around.
But it also means that I can't deal with people saying nice things to me. So please don't do that anymore. we made
No.
me and Kyle made a YouTube video. That was the last thing that we made. It was about rioting and about why riots and mass protests are both super important and essential and have real authentic political content that we should be alert to, and we should refuse this idea that a riot is just kind of like people mindlessly trying to acquire for themselves, and it actually expresses something about the kind of collective political consciousness of the time. It was really good. It was so much fun to work on it together. And yeah, I guess now I would call myself a Marxist. I don't like getting drawn into like which tendency are you. I call myself a Marxist, or if I'm in the right situation, I'll call myself a communist. I like calling myself a communist because there's a great quote from Jody Dean, who's a great American writer, who says communism, or kind of claiming that label, is really important because it names the antagonism. You know, it clearly
Yes.
identifies what it is you're against.
Yeah.
And what it is you are for in a positive political sense. So it's like, it's fine to call yourself an anti-capitalist or to say that you're a leftist, all super useful terms. But I have learned very kind of over the last few years, like, of the value of just going, yeah, I'm a communist as well. So
Yep.
because it names the horizon, right? It names what it is you want to work towards. Like Kyle and Paul, I am super bad at ending things, so I will stop there as well.
Wait, you don't need to end, because actually I had a really an interesting point on that as well. Like when it comes to just sort of saying, like, you know, like I'm an anti-capitalist or something like that as well, because that's one thing that, you know, when I sort of as I've started sort of confronting the far right, they all keep saying, I'm anti-capitalist. I'm anti-capitalist. No, we're like, this movement is fully anti-capitalist, and sort of like, but when you grill them on it, when you actually ask them about that, like, what's your alternative? Oh, well, we want the state to do more things. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah,
that's your fucking. So what? You like what? So you just want more like state capitalism? Okay, fine, whatever. Like this, but it's still capitalism. It's the same fucking mode of production. You haven't changed anything, you know, and it's going to replicate the exact same issues we're seeing in front of us right now. And so anyway, like, this is the issue. I mean, you can call yourself anti-capitalist, but, you know, unless you're presenting that sort of positive way forward, ultimately it doesn't really mean that much. You know, you're not actually highlighting, as you said, the contradiction, which is necessary, I think, moving forward into the future. It's really, really useful, and I really, really appreciate that. So thank you very, very much for that. And also to everybody in the chat, if for some reason you haven't come across either of these two fantastic channels or the Horror Vanguards podcast, then underneath this video in the description box you should find a link to both of the channels. I think to the Twitters as well, the Twitter accounts as well, Twitter profiles below. So go ahead and subscribe, give them some love. They're absolutely fantastic. And yeah, it's an absolute pleasure to have both of you comrades on the stream this evening. So thank you so much for coming on. And yeah, just before we jump into it, before we get started, I just want to ask the two of you: would it be okay with you if we took a couple of questions from the chat as we're moving through this? Maybe there's some questions that people will have as we're discussing the various topics that we're going to come across. Would it be okay with the two of you, if we sort of bounced off the audience as well a little bit?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
great. Well, okay. Obviously, only like good faith questions, nothing strange. So, if people in the chat do want to ask questions, then just write @PaulMoran, and then I'll see the question. It'll be highlighted for me, and I'll know that this is for ourselves here. So let's.
I also have to. I want to jump in really quickly just
Please.
to let chat know that John and I are both very, very big fans of Paul.
Oh, come on. Stop.
And weaseled our way on here.
Oh, come on.
Where we just for the record, you can't say a bunch of nice stuff about us with just like, this is politeness warfare. I'm from the American South. John was just like, oh, the British, we can't take compliments or whatever, and we're polite and stuff. And I'm from the American South. Like this is like, so this is, but anyways, yeah, we're both big fans of Paul's.
Kyle,
and it's very great. It's very good to be
you have a
here.
lovely voice, Kyle.
Oh, thank
Doesn't
you.
he? It's so calming. It's so
Aw.
calming.
Yours too, John. Actually, yeah, like really, really nice calming. Like listening to both of you, I just feel very secure. Like everything's gonna be like, I know this is gonna be a really good stream. Just sorry. This is compliment warfare right here. None of us can take. None of us can take.
Oh, we have such problems. Everyone's being too nice. Oh my god. love it here. All right.
Oh my god, yeah. Okay, brilliant. That's very, very kind of you to say. I really, really appreciate it. And I'm kind of dying with embarrassment at you having said that. So I'm gonna have to move swiftly on from that because I don't know how to take compliments. It's an Irish thing as well. So okay, brilliant. So let's jump into it. Let's fucking confront this beast, cultural Marxism. So let's just address the big elephant in the room. What is cultural Marxism? I think if you're on the left, if you've been on the left for a significant period of time, this isn't really an issue. You've probably dealt with this many times over. But there are people who are new to the left, people who have been radicalized recently, in recent months, recent years, and so on and so forth. And this might still sound like a real thing. It might actually sound like what we're going to address later on, which is Marxist cultural analysis. But the far right, of course, do talk about this cultural Marxism a lot. So would anyone like to get started on that? What is cultural Marxism? And I think we'll have to take it apart a bit as we go. Anyone?
Yeah, Kyle. I think as like the historian, do you want to kind of like give the backstory, give the context?
Yeah, well, I mean, so I'll try and just give the broad strokes of what is ultimately, for the record, like a very sort of paradoxical, very sort of like strange, like contradictory concept that is cultural Marxism. Its definition is not fixed throughout history, so it's been used to various ends and various purposes across time, but it all part of the way, that's why it's a useful sort of like dog whistle for far right figures. But part of it's also part of how we're able to sort of identify the sort of the scope and the content of the accusation of cultural Marxism, whose origins goes toward sort of like German nationalist movements in various parts of like the transition from the 19th into the 20th century. And that's in general, it's stems from terminology, cultural Bolshevism, being Kultur Bolschevismus. My German is fucking horrible, so excuse me. I apologize if anyone is German. But it was it started in parts of in Weimar Germany and the republic before the Nazis rose to power, but then it really proliferated quite a bit during Nazi Germany, and it was used to describe sort of a general various forms and producers and productions of culture that was intrinsically degenerate, that was sort of a degeneracy that arose out of out of contradictions to the sort of traditional authoritarian ideology of fascists. And at the heart of this was a Judeo-Bolshevik conspiracy of a economically well-connected sometimes Judeo-communist, sometimes just communist, sometimes Judeo-communist and the Jews and the communists in various formations and in various parts, whatever the far right finds useful in that particular place and time. That there is this there's this sort of cabal of power and control of various economies and important points of production that have reformed into this sort of culture that prioritizes the sort of dismantling of traditional Western values, but with various degeneracies, be them sexual, be them racial, be them religious heresies. Basically, so cultural Marxism is sort of the descendant of this idea. In particular, it was synthesized into cultural Marxism around certain thinkers who were present in a school of German thinkers who were present during the rise of the Nazis and who fled, called the Frankfurt School. And that's when sort of the cultural Marxism out of this cultural Bolshevism sort of really emerged. And John, I don't know if you want to take over at the Frankfurt School and talk about them. That seems like a good spot.
Yeah. So, like the kind of right wing narrative here is that the international communist movement was expecting revolution throughout Europe. We'd seen revolution in Russia. Revolution came very close in many other sites across Europe, particularly in Germany, but it failed and it didn't come to pass. And so the kind of question is, well, why didn't that happen? And so the right would say, well, that proves that the kind of economic teleology that capitalism will kind of inevitably lead into communism just doesn't work. And so all of these communists had to come up with another way of kind of like bringing about the revolution. So they turned to what we would in modern society call identity politics, and it's all about destabilizing kind of normative Western power. That's the kind of right wing version of what the Frankfurt School does, and it basically gets kind of dragged into a very simplistic conspiracy theory that when the war broke out, the Frankfurt School, along with who were at the time predominantly made up of a lot of academics who were from a Jewish background, made it to the States, and got positions at kind of high-level American universities. A lot of them had very close links with other institutes for research.
Columbia,
yeah, that's
establishing the new school,
helping establish the new school in New York. And it's from there that they've continued to kind of worm their way into it's usually American life, right? It's very focused on America as the empire against communism. And that's the kind of narrative that carries us through up until the end of the Cold War. Truthfully, the history is a lot more complicated than that, and maybe it's much less clear cut. And I don't want to spend too much time on that, but like broadly, the very first generation of the Institute for Social Research, what's otherwise known as the Frankfurt School, was very, very strictly focused on economic Marxism. That changes when Max Horkheimer becomes the leader of the head of the institute, and he puts forward the idea of putting forward a critical theory. So this is not just a general explanatory theory that explains how certain aspects of society work, but it is also one that is a critique. So it is trying to mount criticisms of what's going on in society as well. So the Frankfurt School end up kind of escaping the Nazis. Several of them who were affiliated with the Frankfurt School, like Walter Benjamin, famously don't make it out of Europe alive. And there is this kind of belief then that everything gets boiled down into this reductive conflict, right, between American capitalism, which post the war, the American ideological position is, well, we defeated the Nazis, which is historically, borderline illiterate because it misses the fact that without the Soviet Union, the war never would have been won in the first place.
26 million. Rest in peace.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. America now needs a kind of cultural bulwark against a successful communist project, right? Which is the Soviet Union. So people like Herbert Marcuse, Adorno as well get very involved in new institutes for social research. And there are kind of very complex and close links between figures from the Frankfurt School and the US government. Again, I don't want to get bogged down in the history because it's very complicated, although super interesting. But bluntly, the Frankfurt School becomes this kind of right-wing shorthand for the outsider that is in some way going to damage the American imperial empire, which is the only hope, in big inverted commas, against Soviet communism. It becomes a way of attacking kind of academics or intellectuals. It becomes a way of attacking the left. It becomes a way of attacking Jews. And if you are or you know of people who exist at the intersection of those identities, then those people often become the focus of a lot of this conspiracy theories.
It's so interesting that you say that, and I don't mean to cut across it here, but like literally after I released that video last week, I was accused of A, being Jewish, of B, being part of this cabal, and
Yep,
C,
there you go.
of course, as being an agent of this cultural Marxism, which is it's hilarious, but it's very very strange. And as you said, like it's applied not only to communists, to actual communists, actual Marxists. It's also applied to like liberals, centrists, anyone who sort of, as Kyle rightly emphasized earlier on, anyone who sort of subverts standard traditional roles, participates in anything that might be what they would consider like degeneracy, and so it's really used. It's a catch-all, as you said. It's a catch-all term that's used to sort of write off anyone who might be sort of challenging these things. And it is very interesting how it's wheedled its way into mainstream culture so much. And I looked this up earlier on, actually, very very interestingly. I know that we've given a really really thorough overview of where it comes from and all that, but I didn't realize that actually Adolf Hitler used this term in Mein Kampf. He actually used this in Mein Kampf, and he would have been using it. They literally would have been calling people like cultural Bolsheviks and so on and so forth. Like I didn't realize it was that. It was literally like an actual Nazi thing. Like it was an actual Nazi conspiracy theory, because often sort of on the left, or even like with liberals and stuff like that, they'll say such and such is literal Nazism or whatever, but this is literal Nazism.
Yeah.
This actually is. And Jordan Peterson's like parting it off nowadays with cultural Marxism and postmodern neo-Marxism and this and that and the other,
I think we should also point out that this is a super anti-Semitic conspiracy theory.
Yeah, super.
It is, you scratch the surface. Anyone who talks about cultural Marxism and takes it kind of like seriously and believes it's a real and active threat, you scratch the surface, you're dealing with like a raving anti-Semite.
Yep.
Who is like a heart away from talking about all of the darkest, most kind of fucked up conspiracy theories.
Oh my God.
Which are totally taken directly from the writings of people like Hitler.
Yeah, you can. It makes sense that it's sort of like anti-Semitism being as a sort of like a constructive element of this, like the sort of evolving and changing discourse around cultural Marxism or cultural Bolshevism, because it's contingent upon like an historical extreme in thought, which is a diasporatic, a group of people who have been scattered from their land of origin and historically marginalized in various contexts, both from within and from without. From within being in terms of the various gradations of the now very ethnically diverse populations of Jewish people, from Ethiopian Jews to Sephardic Jews who are more North African and not Spanish, from these various sort of like caste systems from within, but then in particular in the systemic marginalization from without as well. And so it's contingent upon constructing a conspiracy to move a historically marginalized group from one extreme pole all the way to the very other, to make them at the center of a more globalized conspiracy to, introduce destabilizing, that was a good word that was brought up, John, I believe, destabilizing elements to the imagined idea of what Western culture is, has, and shall be, which by imagined I mean reactionary imagination that is seeking to, reactionary meaning that is someone who is seeking to reconstruct various historical contingencies for the past for a fear of degeneracy in historical progress, typically in reaction to the progress of marginalized groups. I feel like that was one gigantic sentence. I could have broken that up into a couple, but a lot of semicolons, a lot of M dashes, and that bad boy.
It's gonna be hell for me to do the subtitles for this later. The captions have to rely on the auto.
And one final point to talk about is this conspiracy theory, this idea of cultural Marxism. it has like literally no explanatory potential. Like this is a really important thing. If you want to think about things from a leftist point of view, you want to look at how does a theory actually match up to the world, right? You know, how do we understand that relationship between the theoretical understanding about politics or about anything with conditions that we see mapped in the world? This is why Lukács has that incredibly famous essay, "What is Orthodox Marxism?" where he says Marxism is not dogma, Marxism is a method. It's a way of thinking and approaching political situations. It's in you know, that's why he wrote about tactics and ethics. It's because Marxism is about method. We don't have a kind of strict dogma. It's not like a religion. It's a way of understanding and approaching political, material, and historical situations. But this has no explanatory potential. You know, when people like Jordan Peterson are kind of raving about postmodern neo-Marxists, which is the newest coat of paint on this old conspiracy theory, uh, even if you go, okay, why? Why is this like there is no explanatory potential, you know, and the solutions are all this. You know, when Peterson's talking about the problems of capitalist modernity, all of his solutions are like, we need to return to this mythical prelapsarian state before anything was kind of wrong. And we do that by, you know, systematically excluding anyone who might be labeled as kind of different or outside these historically constructed normative standards. Like, for all of the criticisms of groups like the Frankfurt School or the Italian Marxists like Gramsci, and there are very valid criticisms, they were wrestling with an incredibly important question, which is what is the relationship between culture and the societies that we live in and capitalist modes of production, and why did the revolution that a lot of them expected to appear, why did that not materialize? What was it about the conditions that had shifted? So, like, for all of the, as I say, for all of the issues and all of the critiques that we can make of their kind of politics and maybe the flaws in their writing and things like that, like, they were actually trying to investigate an incredibly serious problem, and they did it in a way that has a lot more kind of explanatory potential and actually pays attention to the material conditions of that historical moment than any kind of rabid right-wing conspiracy about these mythical others over there who are coming to infiltrate our society and weaken it for no real reason.
The think about the process of change in social relations in Europe from the 19th and into the 20th century. You have you have industrialization popping up for the first time in Europe in several countries over a long period of time, and with that coming in all of the changes in society, like people staying out at night, like the way that people are socializing, it went through a big upheaval. Then you have all of these sort of like booms and busts that comes with capitalist liberal economies, that sort of a thing in the United States in the late 19th century, and then in the early 20th century as well, and also in Europe. And then you have the First World War, and then you have like you go from like Belle Epoque to Dadaism, like really, really quickly. And when you like, as a result, Marxists over this period of time were trying to sort of like they were seeing this sort of escalation and acceleration of what seemed to be like very historically contingent, like, you know, processes in terms of industrialization. And then when it comes up into the 20th century, you have a whole bunch of people sitting around just like kind of in anticipation. Thank God I'm not on camera right now. I'm making a really funny face. I'm like crouched down. I'm just like in anticipation, like I'm hiding in a bush or something. But like you have a bunch of people sort of like waiting to see what's going to happen because the process of production is like going absolutely haywire and doing things it's never done before. And then fascism happens. What do you do? Why did this happen? What is supposed to be like, and it like what was supposed to come from the continued like expansion of the mode of production in capitalist economies. Well, the idea was that like eventually like the mode and mean of production would be sort of overtaken by the conflicts between the working class and the bourgeoisie, the people who own the means and dictate the mode of production versus the people who exchange their labor for a wage using those two things that aren't dictated by them. But instead, you have this different type of belief, an ideology that was like familiar yet unfamiliar, had risen up and taken over big parts of Europe, and there were going to be more wars, and there then was another war over it. And then after things fell, these sort of liberal economies came in to reconstruct things, and people were left with a whole bunch of stuff in their hands, just being like, what the fuck happened? John, you're completely right. The questions that they were investigating were incredibly important and incredibly urgent. And like, to your point about Marxism being like a toolkit by which we can like apply and address intellectual problems, they were trying to figure out, and per bringing up Lukács as well, like they were trying to essentially like figure out from what point in capitalism's sort of like historical phases up into their contemporary moment had the overall consent of a population, be that, you know, an actual consent, like a capitulation of becoming a Nazi, for example, or through sort of like passive acceptance. How did these conditions arise out of the conditions of capitalism, which are very contradictory and seek to ingratiate a small amount of people and keep a large amount of people on wage labor? And so there was all these sort of paradoxes and like problems, intellectual problems, deeply intellectual and deeply like humanistic problems to address, particularly in the realm of culture. And I think that's why you started to see through the Frankfurt School and through Lukács and through Ernst Bloch and through Benjamin and then Gramsci and all of these guys, a way to use sort of Marxism as a framework by which to analyze culture. And the only other thing that I'll say, particularly about the cultural Bolshevism, Judeo-Bolshevism, cultural Marxism whole mess, is that like what's most interesting and what I always think about in terms of this, like why this term carries within it contradictory meanings and assertions, is that a lot of the writers and the theorists who went on to influence the main villains in this story, the Frankfurt School, were advocates of with whom many in the Frankfurt School probably didn't agree, and I think definitely didn't agree with this stuff, were advocates of like reconceptualizing what like realism in art could be. Because you mentioned Lukács, and I thought about Realism in the Balance, that essay that he wrote.
Yeah.
They were trying to come up with new ways to critically read text in a broad sense, and, you know, the written word, but also in you know, visual aesthetic art, all kinds of stuff, film, whatever. But they're trying to sort of like, there's all kinds of various like disagreements, contradictions, like different takes, expansions on certain takes that exist across a great deal of thinkers who talk about some of them talk about different ideas, and who happen to share an affiliation both in terms of the institution that they came from, where the country they came from, and a few of their sort of like intellectual curiosities and modes of inquiry. So to say that this is, to use the conspiratorial language of like a cabal that's like coordinating to like institute gender studies into your mathematics or whatever, or like that's trying to like gender studies in the NFL, like, or something like that. It's just the unity is a false framework that's doing a lot of the heavy lifting here.
Yeah,
It's not
completely.
it's not a useful mode of inquiry for this sort of a thing.
It's so interesting, yeah. Both of you kind of touched on this, like just the lack of explanatory potential of this theory, of this conspiracy theory. It's so ridiculous. And like I actually, in the video that I did last week, and I'm sorry to keep bringing it back to this, but this is my most recent sort of encounter and engagement with like fascists and people on the far right, or so-called third positionists. Which is literally just the far right anyway. But anyway, but yeah, no, like they. I was talking about how, like, of course, the real enemy is the capitalist imperialist system, the global capitalist imperialist system, and you know, they were like, oh, and of course the people who sort of oversee that, and then they were like, oh well, who are the people who oversee that? And of course they wanted to say that it was, of course, as you were mentioning, this kind of cabal, this kind of like these Jewish people, this, but like this offers absolutely no explanatory potential. Like, what are their motives? Why would they do this? Why is it like, what, like, how does this account for like poor Jewish people all over the world? Like how, why? But it's, none of it makes any sense whatsoever. Sorry, I know it's a little bit of a rant, but kind of relevant. Someone did like a response video saying this as well, and like really pointing out how it was the Jews who were doing all of this, and God, it's just such a strange and bizarre thing, you know. So yeah. Anyway, sorry. In case people in the chat haven't noticed, the two of the, of course, Kyle and John are far smarter than I am. They are scholars, intellectuals, academics, and I am a dum dum. So please excuse my level of discourse compared to theirs.
Don't chat.
Boo.
Don't believe his lies.
Don't do it.
He's
Don't
lying
listen to
about
him.
himself. Don't listen to him. Instead, go watch his video. It's extremely good.
Oh,
All
stop.
equals big brain. Big brain takes on this channel.
Smooth brain,
Poison
isn't that what they say? All right. Well, thank you very much. That was absolutely brilliant. Okay, that's brilliant. Absolutely. Thank you very much. Let me just take a look at the chat here and see if there are any questions before we proceed any further from the cultural Marxism question, and we move into the actual like Marxist cultural analysis stuff. I'm just gonna take a quick little look at the chat here, and yeah, let me just see here. Jeremy Boom asks, how do we prevent Breivik becoming a template or format for other anti-cultural Marxists to fulfill their goals? Anyone know who Breivik is? Breivik? Anyone heard of that?
Just talking about Anders Breivik, who
Breivik.
was a terrorist who murdered a whole bunch of young, I think Norwegian.
Yes,
yeah, no,
Norway, I believe.
Democrats.
Yeah, I know the one you're talking about now. Yeah.
So Breivik wrote a 1,000-page manifesto.
Manifesto, yeah. And he talked about this as well, didn't he? He talked about cultural Marxism like in the first couple of paragraphs.
He mentions cultural Marxism like 600
But
times.
yeah,
Okay,
it's
yeah.
a huge theme in everything. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's like, how do we stop that becoming the kind of template? Well, in a way, that template has already happened. You know, we've talked about this as a conspiracy theory that goes back to the Second World War, but really you can trace this suspicion of radical politics and anti-Semitism back to the 19th century, when anti-Semitism was kind of rife throughout Europe, and even further back. So, like, it's incredibly important that we know what cultural Marxism is. We know how the term is deployed, and we know what an actual Marxist or a leftist approach to cultural analysis looks like as well.
Yeah,
because it's very easy for people who maybe don't know a lot about Marxism or about left theory to easily conflate the two, and that's really dangerous. That's really dangerous. So, like, in a way, like, I don't know what the answer to that question is. You know, I don't know how we stop that from being the template. In a way, like, there have already been people who've mentioned Breivik as an inspiration. Like this kind of dangerous right-wing violence that's directed against the perceived outsider, the threat, the other. It's
Muslims in particular, are think about New Zealand.
And the way that it's become kind of combined in a really toxic way with, like, you know, ironic internet memery and shit like that. You know, the guy in New Zealand, when live streaming his mass murder, yelled "subscribe to PewDiePie." It's like, so in a way, I don't know how we stop that from happening. I think we need to. This is actually why kind of Marxist cultural analysis is really important, because we need to be able to understand and subject these phenomena, subject these theories, these ideologies to critique. Because actually that's the only way that we expose their contradictions. That's the only way we adapt our own political practice against them. And it's the only way that hopefully we eliminate them entirely.
Yeah, absolutely. Eliminate them entirely, I think, is the key part to take away from that. Ideologically, of course, and in Minecraft, so we're not saying anything that could get us into any trouble legally. Brilliant. Thank you very much. There's just a couple more questions here, I think, which we might touch on if people, if anyone wants to take them, and if not, we'll push on to into actually, I suppose, moving beyond that and explain what Marxist analysis of culture actually is. But before we push into that, Zanzi, great comrade, go subscribe to Zan's channel. Zanzi asks, how much of cultural Marxism is, and in quote marks, a narrative folklore impersonating the aesthetics of history? Anyone want to take that or speak to that a little bit?
Oh, history question. That's for Kyle.
Well, I do have actually an answer for this. So this is one of the more important distinctions across Marxist analysis of culture, which, yes, for the record, has changed over time. There are Marxist. I don't want to shock everybody. I really hope you all can sit down here. There are Marxists who disagree with each other. I don't know. I know this is new. I know this is new.
I can't believe this.
I know this is really tough to hear, but Marxists actually disagree with each other a lot.
Get out.
So, but this is Zahn, which, first of all, comrade, 100%. I listen to me on Zahn's podcast. The idea of this gets to the core at the idea of Marxist analysis of ideology, which, like, okay, I'm gonna try and define ideology in like a sentence ish or whatever. Okay, so there's two ways to yeah, I know, right? Thank you very much. So in the Marxist sort of more orthodox original reading of Marx that Zahn was doing, described very, very well, very clearly. Ideology is a means by which false imaginations of historical change, or like the sort of both history and the present, are suppressed by ideology, which are the false imaginations that are pushing out the more material, real, quote unquote, aspects of the production process and how that affects society. So ideology is something that, in this Marxist sense, suppresses the reality of the material by inserting other sort of like mythos into this. And now after this, when you get to it's a sort of like a group of a school of thought called structuralism that we could talk about in a different context, because this is down the road. But the Marxist structuralists, particularly Louis Althusser, who I know Zahn's been reading a lot of recently, as well as some others, saw ideology as a rather than the false imagination that's suppressing the material. They see ideology as a representation of an individual's relationship with the real world. So instead of it being a representation of the process of production, it's this intermediary force that suppresses and constructs humans based off of their relationship with this real world, and that the ideology is instead like it forms itself differently. And so and this all relates to culture, because it helps us determine whether or not what exactly it is that we're dealing with. Right? Is it just a false construction that is a growth and extension from the mode of production that we're in, capitalist neoliberalism, and right now? Is it representative of that, or is it move further into having these sort of constructive effects on how we see ourselves as subjects in this mode of production? So it's less about, it's in part of what ideology is or what culture is, but it's even more so about what culture is doing. And I lean toward the latter, slightly more complex structuralist assertions of the functions of culture, which is in part like which really in a lot of ways rises out of Gramsci's work, but also attempts to try and revise Gramsci a little bit. I also don't. I'm not a structuralist or anything by any orthodox means, but so the answer is like yes, but there's a lot more going on in terms of like how like, there's a reason why like as the 20th century moved on, Marxists started to be like, okay, maybe we should apply like Freud to this, and see how like this sort of the exteriors of our world, these structures, are then in turn informing and structuring the subject, and how then we like this process of like across these from structure to self, and then internal structure to self, and then to big structure, etc. That they're incredibly complex, but at the same time are absolutely related 100% in my opinion to the process and the changes in the mode of production, that you can't separate culture from economy when you get down to it.
Yeah.
There are these, they inform one another in ways that we're still learning about.
Yeah, completely.
In my opinion. So I know that was a really long answer, but
No, it was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Really, really appreciate it. And it's going to lead in as well. We're going to come back to that a little bit as well, about how you can't separate, culture from that economic base of capitalism and of course neoliberalism at its most at its stage at the moment. But yeah, we're going to come back to that a little bit later. So thank you very much. That was absolutely brilliant, fantastic work, Kyle. We'll quickly just look at Matthew Regan's question here, Paul. I've heard the accusation of the far right working in a cult template. Has there been any work on this? Anyone want to touch on this? The far right sort of operating as kind of cults and so on.
Yeah, I kind of get what they mean, but I'm sort of like with Kyle on this one, because the danger of thinking that way is you go, oh well, people have just chosen to believe something wrong, and if we provide them with the correct facts, then they will stop believing that. And I think that's very tempting. But I actually think that, like, ideology expresses a subjective relation to the means of production really clearly. I mean, you can see that especially in the far right. I mean, it's like people like Richard Spencer have are very well situated economically speaking. This idea of like the mythical white working class that gets talked a lot about in English politics and in American politics, as they have to be kind of placated. I think is again, it's a kind of political construct and a myth that's designed to obscure actually how economic relations are determining on ideological belief. I think that the advantage of looking at things from this kind of cult point of view is that what it provides is like a convenient and easy answer to any kind of struggles that you might be encountering. This conspiracy theory, this myth, this idea of cultural Marxism. You go, well, oh, it's not any system's fault. It's these others. It's those over there who have come in here and have damaged what was supposed to be a perfect life for you. It often operates on individuating people rather than talking about things on a class basis.
Yeah.
And I actually think, if we want a politics that actually helps people address the real what you can call the kind of existential problems of existence, why do I feel kind of terrible? Why is my life very depressing? Why does my job feel so insecure? It's very like the advantage of the cultural Marxism myth. It gives you an easy target to project all of those things onto, when in fact the advantage of kind of Marxist politics, of left politics, is class consciousness. How do you dispel that kind of cult? Is not by giving individuals better facts, but by connecting individuals to the masses. It's the way through this kind of reactionary politics is by building class consciousness, is by raising class consciousness. It's by letting people know that their individual. Mark Fisher writes really movingly about this, actually, that their individual existential problems, like the reason that you feel shitty and depressed and alone, is not because of all of those others who've come over and have made your life difficult. It's because we exist in a system which is designed, when it is functioning perfectly, to make us feel shitty and alone and depressed and like we're struggling. And the solution is not to blame the external other. It's to kind of connect, and it's to build a class that recognizes what it is in and of itself, and is able to assert a political power that makes demands, that exerts its own political agency. Um, Basically, the solution to the cult of the alt-right is class consciousness.
Absolutely.
Yeah, agency, rather than removing agency through the way that a cult would, removing agency through the inculcation of people through various means unto some sort of a leader or whatever, rather than what the fascists would do, which is subsume the individual under a governing like reactionary identity, a governing reactionary state, a governing reactionary whatever. It's about helping people realize that they are themselves historical change agents. So it's not just like an opposite. It takes it like, it's not even just an oppositional force. It's to like help people understand that it's not just that you have contemporary agency, is that your agency is integrated into this long historical process of struggle and change,
Yeah.
with other working people, which is pretty fucking sick, if you ask me. But,
I'll drink to that. Well, I'll drink to anything. I'm Irish. Fuck it. Brilliant. Okay, will we push forward? Does anyone else want to say anything about this phenomenon of cultural Marxism, or are we good now to sort of push ahead into Marxist cultural analysis? All
it's
good?
bad. It's bad. It's very bad.
Fantastic answer. Okay, let's jump into it now. So what is Marxist cultural analysis? And then I suppose the interesting question following on from that would be, how do politics and culture intersect? Now, of course, we've referred to this a little bit beforehand. We talked about how you really can't separate culture from the economic base and superstructure and all these sorts of Marxist ideas. But let's jump into this. Would anyone like to get us started? Anyone want to take the lead on this one?
Yeah, I mean, let's start with like real basics, like base and superstructure, two really important categories for a Marxist conception of a totality, of a historical totality. So base, we have the productive forces, our modes of production, which are usually protected by what I think it's Engels who refers to the great bodies of armed men. So you have the army, you have the state, whose function is to protect capital and protect the means of production. Of superstructural elements, these would be things which are not directly determining on the modes of production. So kind of in a very kind of traditional and now possibly not 100% accurate Marxist idea, this would be things like theater, this would be things like kind of culture, arts would be superstructural. And obviously in those, that's our kind of model of society, and obviously the economic base is determining in the last instance of society as a whole. Broadly, I think that's pretty uncontroversially true, but I think as the relationship between politics and culture has gotten more complex, or rather like the relationship between modes of production and culture has gotten more complex, we need to kind of conceive of that not as like a hierarchical pyramid where we have our base on the bottom and the superstructure on the top, but we have a kind of like dialectical relationship between the two. Modern culture is like now almost completely integrated in the mainstream, is very integrated into modes of production, right? Major movie studios have profits in the billions. They are essentially factories that are producing product, often by artists and creatives who are incredibly badly paid, hugely exploited. I mean, if you know, I blame Kyle for making me a gamer. So like, if you've heard of the concept of crunch in game development, game developers have like hellish working conditions,
I've
and
heard, yeah.
that is directly linked to the profitability of what it is they produce.
Yeah.
So
I think, like to your precise point, John. I don't know if this is true. I think I heard on Twitter yesterday that I can't remember which game. I don't know if it was Cyberpunk or something. I think it may have been that Cyberpunk 2077 getting delayed for additional tweaks and that sort of a thing, which it will again probably. That the that the developers found out on social media. I don't know if that's true, but I heard that well, yeah, that's just a talk like that happened just the other day. Like just to sort of drive your point home, it's completely true. As for also, I am guilty of distributing gamer pills regularly. So watch out. Anyways, John,
yeah. Saying. Before we started streaming, I was talking to Kyle about a video I want to make about the video game Bloodborne, and I would never have been making videos about video games were it not for Kyle. So it's all his fault that he's done this to me.
He's working his way
so proud of myself.
Yeah,
you just need to know how like that was that was a feat. That was so good.
So to kind of get us back on track, like what's the relationship between the kind of economic base of a society, its mode of production, and the culture that it produces? In many ways, they are now at the point of being mutually reinforcing, mutually constituting, right? Certain kind of movies will only get made because they're profitable, and the most profitable studios will only make certain kinds of movies. We'll get onto a couple of really high-profile examples in a second. I mean, this is why the Frankfurt School, particularly Adorno and Horkheimer, talked about the culture industry. They were super pessimistic about what culture looked like in a capitalist society.
Well, yeah,
Kyle,
I mean,
maybe you want to kind of like pick it up from there.
Well, can I? Yeah, I mean, like my understanding now, I've only got a very.
Yeah.
Can I like my
understand?
My understanding of this idea of like the culture industry is incredibly rudimentary. I think I had like one class on it in college, and like some like sort of random sort of extra sort of almost extracurricular kind of module, and it was this idea that like there's this industry, there's all this culture that's meant to keep us sort of distracted all the time. Like whenever we get some free time away from work, when we're not working, it's like the evenings, so we just spend our time sort of consuming culture, which kind of pacifies us and sort of keeps us from organizing politically, and it also sort of reinforces, as we say, like cultural norms, cultural values, reinforces of course that economic base of capitalism. It might reinforce, for example, let's say the nuclear family is a good example of this. You know, of course, the nuclear family sort of, if you go back to like Engels and stuff like that, on the origin of the private property, the family, the state, and so on and so forth. Like we'll see that like in every show that we watch, it's always like the nuclear family. It's always like white man, white wife, and kids, and that's it. That's sort of reinforced as normal to us, and so it's kind of this way of sort of both sort of indoctrinating us into what is considered to be normal and what's acceptable, but also as a way of distracting and sort of depoliticizing us, defanging us, really, and it causes all these kinds of problems. It's doing that, and it's sort of it's incentivized to basically just kind of keep on. To keep us hooked, I suppose, and to keep us sort of sedated in a kind of way. Am I sort of, am I in the right sort of area? I mean, I could be completely wrong there, but that's kind of my vague understanding.
You hit a couple of important points. It actually, the direction that we're going in is in that direction, which is useful. Part of the reason why cultural analysis is a really useful way to understand Marxism is because there's a lot of terms that people use when they talk about Marxism, which places an emphasis on the process of production and how economies function, and we talk about the means of production, which is the basically the things that we use to make stuff. Like at one point it was mostly the production, like stateside at least, of cheap consumer goods in industrial factories, the machines and the buildings and the property and stuff. This is the means by which people made stuff. Then you have the mode of production, which is how things are made, which is dictated by people who own the means of production. So bosses, owners, bourgeoisie, etc. And there's another point that is really, really important, especially in the parts from Marx that went on to influence a lot of this cultural studies stuff, which is the relations of production, which is this idea that the best way to sum up Marxist cultural analysis for me is, this is the beginning point, of course, things get complex, but it's the conditions born from a mean, mode, and relations of production extend past the point of production into the daily lives and socialization of humans, and it orders and it structures the world as an extension of its condition and historical contingencies. And so what this is an extension from this idea that the social relations we have, the way that human beings socialize with one another, of which culture is a huge part, that the means by which we live our lives and like we live in a society.
I knew that was going to come up.
Every time. Well, someone was going to say it if I didn't say it. Is that the production, it constructs the
Okay. Am I back? I can't really tell if we're actually back or not. Let me double check. I think we're back. I think it's probably okay now. I'm gonna have to start a new call. Give me a sec. We'll pull things back on track. Sorry about that. Bear with me. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I'm not sure here. Okay, we're live now. Jesus, sorry about this. Sorry about this, comrades. Let me. I have to start up a new Google Hangouts call here with the lads, and then we'll be good to go. Oh, fucking Stalin messing up my internet again. Here we go. Lovely stuff. Harry's keeping it. I hope he's been enjoying the stream so far. Right? Sorry for the feckin' mess there. You can hear me? Okay, good. I'm glad to hear. Thanks, Partisan, for letting me know that you can hear me. The real friends along the way, and so on and so forth. Let me just start up a new call and get the lads back in, and hopefully they're happy to jump back on for another call there. I don't know what happened. I think just the internet must have went down for a second there. It's really strange. I paid a solid €5, a solid €5, you know, for this Ethernet cable. So yeah, you're saying I didn't seem to drop it. The others did. On my screen, what I saw here was it was really strange. It looked like my face was like frozen in the most awkward kind of position imaginable. Like my eyes were looking up. It was just kind of hilarious. So let me get the boys back on the stream, and we'll get this up and running again. Sorry for the delay here. Do you know, actually I can't. I was gonna say that I just like edit this out and like post stream so people wouldn't need to worry about this, but it's kind of it's kind of annoying because it deletes the chats that goes alongside the screen. If I alter the stream at all, like even like a tiny little bit, it'll delete the entire chat, the live chat that goes along with it, which is kind of crap because we're answering questions and people are commenting, and it's really really useful, and so on and so forth. So yeah. Anyway, let me just get the lads back in here. Let me see.
You got one.
Hey, we got one of the lads. How are you getting on, Kyle? Good to hear. I'm so sorry about that. My internet just seemed to die.
So good.
I'm really really sorry, and it was like mid conversation as well, mid about to drop the mic, and then it's just gone. I'm so
this
sorry.
would not be a stream without technical difficulties.
Well, definitely not a Streamlabs stream. Fucking Streamlabs OBS. I swear to God, I need to just move over to standard OBS. It seems so much more simple and so much more so much better. So yeah, I'm so sorry. Oh, I see we got John back as well. John, I'm so sorry for that as well. That was my internet seemed to just die.
Yeah, no worries, man. No worries.
For a second. I'm so sorry for
No, these things happen.
live streams. Live stream. We should have done a podcast. Would have been grand. The internet got broken. Apparently, the people in the chat are saying that the stream is too powerful.
Kyle just making so many good points. He broke the internet.
Broke the internet.
Yeah. The CIA spook. The CIA spook that monitors Paul's channel was just like, no, this shit's too real. Let's
Dropping truth bombs. Truth bombs left, right, and center. Pull it. I'm so sorry.
I believe I was talking about the social relations of production.
Yeah.
Which are what constitute the way that culture develops and disseminates. And yeah, it's basically the idea. This is sort of the foundational thinking of Marxist cultural analysis. It gets a lot more complicated there after that, in terms of, what exactly, like, really the application of various forms of methodology from within Marxism. But it's this idea that it's Marx asserts it in the Grundrisse, in part. He talks about these sort of like means of life, and the voluntary and involuntary structures that constitute our totalities in society that like are saying that there is, has, always shall be, that they're these, sort of like very human, like that they extend from the spirit of humanity. But what Marx is basically saying is that no, those are conditions that are reconstituted based off of economics, and that the mode of production is bringing these prerequisites, quote unquote, scare quotes, into reality as a means for, constituting and reconstituting itself. And that culture is a huge part of how we engage in that space. And the sort of, as you were saying earlier, Paul, the means of occupation, control, etc., that emerged, and that the thinkers from, say, the Frankfurt School, the sort of chief villains of the quote unquote cultural Marxists, also a bunch of people who aren't really like the new version of a cultural Marxist is also like, it's like a post-structuralist, and like a literary theorist, and like it's all this sort of like it also lacks a certain logic to it. But just basically that the property relations and productive forces are working in a way to constitute and reconstitute our particular historical contingencies for the production of culture. So culture acts in a way, emerges in across various time periods and across various modes of capitalist production. Culture still finds a way to emerge as an extension of it. And what you were getting at, Paul, was, I would probably say, one of the more popular / assigned texts from the Frankfurt School, which is segments of the Dialectic of Enlightenment, a collection of
Yeah,
essays
yeah.
that they co-authored. Um, the most im- the most read one being one entitled "In About Something Called the Culture Industry," which is their examination. So they were living in Southern California at the time, I believe, and so they were exposed to sort of the real like free based American culture, of like the consumer culture of the 1960s and the 1970s, which was like really intense. And so what they saw is this sort of various constructions of images and sort of like ideologies that are born from and contained within these images in advertisement and television and film, etc., were sort of dominating and asserting themselves as the constitutive elements of society. And the way that people were affiliating and associating with one another were based off of were based off of this constructed plane of ideology, this place by which they can discuss the symbols, signs, and signifiers of capitalism, free from the oppressive mechanisms of class consciousness and stuff, to where it is very, as John mentioned earlier, it's a very pessimistic view on the way that culture operates and functions in society, but it also was a reality that they were facing, which is why the historical context, another thing that John had mentioned earlier to place an emphasis on, is always really important with thinking about them, because this is in real time that they're sort of confronting these evolving and changing consumer cultures, if that all makes sense.
But also a thing to kind of like push this a little bit further is that culture is not monolithic, right? Much as there is the tendency to try and make culture like homogenous and monolithic and often deeply capitalist in its aims and goals. Like culture has kind of like its own internal dynamics as well. Like a really good kind of like foundational essay in this kind of tradition of Marxist and leftist analyses of culture is Raymond Williams' essay from the 50s called "Culture is Ordinary." And if people don't know, like Raymond Williams was the son of a railway signalman from Wales, from a working class background, and made it to Cambridge University, became a kind of really involved in the Working Men's Educational Association, became a kind of really important figure in like the New Left, helped set up the New Left Review. Um, really interesting, really influential academic writer as well. And so he writes this essay where he's talking about like Cambridge is held up as like the epitome of like English culture, and he's like, well, the culture that he grew up with in this working class community is just as full of like intellectual content, often has a better sense of community, often has a better sense of like uh, politics because of the strength of trade unionism. So he was like, culture is not just simply about these superstructural institutions, but culture is ordinary, right? It's about what people actually do, and in that ordinariness, yes, you can find things which are about kind of strengthening the thing that Kyle was talking about, that right, that the extension into relations of production, right, into our social world, that kind of capitalist logic. But you can also find potential sites of resistance. You can find like forms of collective community. You can find collective practices which can be incredibly influential and powerful. So it's like it's not all like I don't think we should kind of be like uh just we shouldn't take the pessimism of people like the Frankfurt School as like the only way of looking at things, because as Kyle pointed out, Marxists occasionally don't agree with one another.
Once in a blue moon.
And the human, well, in another point that's easy to jump off of because it's something that John and I share, which is an influence from certain elements of Marxist humanism. There's a like in the same way that he was discussing the sort of alternatives to a Frankfurtian sort of like very pessimistic take, for lack of a better term. There are sort of like not only were there these sort of like countervalences that came before it that were the Frankfurt was sort of opposite, like the utopianism of like Ernst Bloch, for example, but also in the Communist Party historians group in the UK, particularly with the historian E.P. Thompson, sees called like explicitly in positioning themselves as the examiners and analyzers of the production of working class culture and working class identities across times, taking into account all of the sort of like, complications that come with introducing culture into a Marxist analysis, but doing so in a way to ascribe unto and understand the historical agency of working people and the ability for them to the way that they engaged with and altered and changed their environments by asserting themselves in various points of either various historical ruptures or in points of just sort of like more like inner construction in their own identities and how they affiliate and associate with one another. And so there's these like all these other sort of like very exciting and inspiring, something I think that we see in contemporary culture too, the production of culture that not only reflects like the like non-bougie fucker like identities of the people who are making it, but also in some ways are exerting themselves either in their narratives or in the way they present themselves as an alternative to the predominant forces of production and capitalism today, or who have in some ways are trying to be created and exist in some ways. And the possibility of this is debatable, of course, but at least making an attempt to try and exist outside of the dominant mode of production and to do something that is like more unto the complexity and the like the affirmative qualities of the production of art as like an expression of being a human, something that's much closer to something that's like, for lack of a better term, pure in terms of the construction of art, something that's not contingent upon all of these like really insidious and fucked up like economic and historical mechanisms. So there's some good out there, I guess.
Yeah,
Well,
totally.
it's sorry, you go on. I don't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
I was gonna talk about like the fact that you can see this like throughout history as well. Like the surrealists and the situationists in France, maybe the most famous example. Andre Breton talks about this. He says there was the need for a myth of liberation to counter what he called the myth of Odin, and he was talking there about fascism. Because what does fascism provide? It doesn't just provide economic reorganization; it provides cultural logic, a certain kind of cultural logic, right? That's incredibly violent and discriminatory, but it is also able to kind of like cohere a certain demographic of society. So, like the surrealists, who were kind of confronting the rise of European fascism, were interested in art as a space in which you could articulate something that was not just kind of like about a new economic system, but was about new kinds of relations between people and between kind of like space as well. So this is something that's kind of always occurred at various points throughout history. It's getting harder, I think, to maintain what Marcuse called the autonomous independence of art. And in a way, I actually think that makes it more important that we are critical of culture and not just kind of like dismissive and pessimistic about it, but subject it to critique to see what can be like drawn out of it. Like if you want a really good example, go watch some of Kyle's videos about video games. Like extremely good at like drawing out some of the things that we can use to help us understand our contemporary situation. And sometimes that means like reading texts or films or games against themselves, right? Trying to subvert that capitalist logic that runs all the way through them, and to find what might be kind of subversive or useful for political work.
Absolutely, yeah. That's really really interesting. I actually I had a point that I wanted to ask, and it's something that I've been quite curious about. People have actually both of you sort of alluded to this in various ways, especially with regard to Raymond Williams, and this sort of idea that there was a little bit more agency to things. I suppose there was an extension beyond the standard Marxist cultural analysis of purely seeing culture as, let's say, reproduction, more as like a reproductive process of reproducing that economic base and reinforcing that economic base, but also as a point of production in and of itself. There's almost a sense of, rather than like the base and superstructure sort of going just like one way from base to superstructure, it becomes more kind of circular, more kind of like a circular kind of thing. You know, the base is reinforcing the superstructure is reinforcing the base, and they're both sort of helping each other in that regard. I studied this a little bit, but I didn't get into like proper detail with regard to this particular subject. But when I'm listening to this now, it seems as I'm listening to it now as a horrific dogmatic Marxist, it seems to maybe be less the kind of vulgar Marxism of old, 100% materialism. There seems to be like a little bit of idealism allowed into that as well, and so on. But I'm interested. Do you want to maybe touch on this sort of idea a little bit more about modern culture, kind of as production, and maybe a little bit more about Raymond Williams and his role, and sort of, I suppose, cultural materialism and these kinds of things. Just purely because I'm interested in the subject and I'd like to learn a little bit more, and I think that the two of you could really offer a lot more in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, totally. I think this point about idealism is really important, right? And maybe that's true up to a point, but it doesn't need to be true, right? Because Williams just made a really simple but really important point, which is that culture is about what people do. It's about practices. It isn't just about these kind of abstract ideas. It's actually about what people are actually doing. And what this, he's super influenced in his cultural writings by the work of Gramsci and other kind of European Marxists. And Gramsci's point is, Gramsci in many ways is a super orthodox Leninist. He's part of the International. He's at congresses and he stays in Moscow for a very long time. But he's also someone who takes the issue of culture incredibly seriously, because he recognizes that it is a mediating factor on political forces. And this is why I kind of like, I don't necessarily think that it is an idealist conception of society to say that culture is production. On a very basic level, no, it isn't. If you look at like Disney controls a colossal slice of mainstream culture. What is it, like 8 out of the 10 most profitable films ever made are like part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's like these are they are a productive force. Their films take in more money than some countries have as their GDP. So it's like this is not just a kind of idealist conception of things. This has real material impact, and it changes how people behave. It changes what people do. So again, we're not talking about kind of like abstracts. Cultural analysis is about paying attention to what it is that people do, and what kinds of things are produced and kind of like put into the world. And I think the way that we can kind of talk more about this, and I think this is probably something Kyle's got some really interesting things to say about, is Gramsci's notion of traditional and organic intellectuals. Because this is a really important point of like why he's interested in cultural analysis, because our traditional intellectuals are basically the cultural vanguard of the capitalist bourgeoisie, right? They exist to explain and give sense to capitalist hegemony, to explain society to itself, and to naturalize those relations that Kyle was talking about earlier, right? To make it seem as if this is just a kind of law of the universe. Obviously, your boss is the one who takes all of the profits out of the company. Obviously, your wages have to remain at this level. Obviously, you don't have any say in your workplace. The job of the traditional intellectual is to kind of explain society to itself in a way that naturalizes and obscures the constructed and contingent nature of those relations. Maybe the best example of this in the contemporary would be business schools. right? People
Yeah.
who go to business school to get their degree in management consultancy and then spend the rest of their working careers naturalizing working relationships and exploitation. Gramsci said, actually, what we should be interested in is the organic intellectual. So, like, not everybody is going to be the organic intellectual. Everyone has a kind of intellectual capacity, but the organic intellectual is that kind of figure or subject that can explain to the class which it's from the true relation of its of kind of class relationships. It's about kind of uh, it's about the kind of material actualization of class consciousness. That's why paying attention to culture is so important. Gramsci noted that, like, in Italy at the time, if you were from the south of Italy, you probably grew up in a rural environment that was very poor. And if you wanted to advance, if you wanted to kind of like better your condition, one of the best things you could do would be to join the Catholic Church.
Mm.
And that would be good for you and it would be good for your family. But the Catholic Church's interests were predominantly aligned with the ruling classes, which meant that you would end up explaining and naturalizing those classes to the community that you were part of, that was probably exploited and poor and trying to survive in a farming economy.
Can I just say that's like almost like a 1-to-1, like exactly what happened with the Catholic Church in Ireland as well. Like you get like a free education and all, like everything like would be like you'd be accommodated in every way imaginable through joining the Catholic Church, joining the clergy and all that, like all throughout the 1900s in Ireland as well. So even like my dad would have had like a similar experience as well. Like he was actually he would have joined the priesthood for a certain time, like got an education and all that. He ended up leaving after all, but yeah, like 1-to-1, incredibly relevant all over the world.
Gramsci's point was like, well, how do we stop this from happening? You know, how do we create structures and institutions which are going to help people who actually want to understand the world and kind of get an education or write or understand the society in which they're living without having to go into this route of being a traditional intellectual. What you need to look for is the kind of organic intellectuals, which is working class people who can understand the working class situation and then kind of explain the working class situation, propagate it. You know, this is why Gramsci's point was like, this is why he spent so much time writing journalism and establishing newspapers, because it was a great way of, well, he put it that you had to be an organizer, an educator, and a constant persuader. That was your job. Yep. You had to kind of organize people. You had to persuade people to come to your side of seeing things. And you had to kind of be the person who's willing to explain the real relationships of a society to others. Maybe Kyle can kind of pick things up from there.
Oh, buddy. Oh, man. I don't even know. Oh, man. Where do I start? I just typed notes. Okay, where do we start? Here. Yeah, okay.
Your
point about traditional...
Can I just ask?
Go.
No, I don't want to actually interject anything here. I really need to go to the bathroom. Do you mind if I just step out for like 30 seconds, do my thing, and come back and you
I got it.
Is that okay?
Let's run the show, Kyle.
Okay, John and Kyle, with great power comes great responsibility. The two of you are taking over for the next 30 seconds to a minute. Please nobody time that. Is that okay with you, lads?
Yeah,
go for it.
Cheers. Thanks very much. I'll slide back in a moment. Okay.
We have commandeered this vessel.
Do not attempt to adjust your station.
I can check on polls while Paul is pissing. What do we got? It's our show now. What do we talk about while Paul's gone? Do we just be nice to Paul while he's not here?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should. We do that when he's here anyway, but I think we should definitely do that now.
Like, Paul is just like... The reason why his stuff is good and the reason why his stuff is gaining a lot of traction as it should is because he has this thing that I see it in Brett from Rev Left as well. And an incredible way to synthesize and explain complex ideas in a way that a whole bunch of people can understand. And then he's also very charming and handsome. That's just the other.
Excellent hair.
Yeah,
Just like
phenomenal hair.
the way that I met Paul was that I just tweeted one day, invite me to your Discord server so I can just post communist propaganda there. And a bunch of Irish leftists invited me to a Discord server, and that's how I met Paul, and that's how I discovered his YouTube channel. But yeah, like heavy Brett from Rev Left vibes, excellent
real.
hair, some super good streams. What's your favorite Paul stream?
Oh man, I was looking at a few of them before we came on here. Most recently, I mean, his chat was with Mexi, a mutual friend of all of ours.
Super good.
Was fantastic. The combating fascism stream, that one was really good.
I thought the one on socialism in India was super interesting.
What tangent have we gone off on here?
What?
Nothing.
What? Oh shit, he's back. Everyone in chat, be cool. Be cool.
Everyone be cool. Nothing. We're just talking about baseball.
Oh,
Shit,
yeah. As an Irishman, I know very much about baseball. It's
I
very
realized, right?
it's very good when you hit the ball with that wood.
I realized it right when I said it. I'm like, shit. I didn't realize where I am.
Yeah, Cuba. The Cubans like baseball, so that's
The Cubans are very have a long history of baseball and are often very good at it.
Yeah, very, very, very. Those pictures of Fidel, beautiful, absolutely gorgeous.
But what was about to happen was Kyle was just about to just drop some absolute fire talking about organic intellectuals.
Oh, beautiful, James Connolly.
yeah.
I'm thinking James Connolly right now.
Yes,
Organic intellectual of the
precisely.
working class.
Oh, 100%. And a useful counterpart, an American iteration of a Connolly-esque type, Eugene Debs.
Oh yeah.
Who also was a labor organizer who also wrote like incessantly, and like some probably the most, like, what I completely blanked out at the beginning of the show in an effort to try. This is what always happens when I try and be short-winded, is I forget to answer part of the question. But my journey to the left began with two things: Eugene Debs and Leo Tolstoy's essay "The Kingdom of God is Within You," because I grew up as an evangelical Christian. I'm not religious now, but the liberation theology and the tenets of sort of like the Christian left that spun off after the production of that Tolstoy essay were very influential for me, especially Debs, because I grew up in a working class family. And so Debs, as something of an organic intellectual, someone who came from he was named, the V is in his name, Eugene V. Debs, stands for Victor, after Victor Hugo. His first name is, I'm now blanking on who he's named after. He's named after French novelists, because his father was a big reader, but Debs was a very unpretentious, a very learned. He saw. This is the point that I'm trying to make. What John was describing was perfect, and because what Gramsci was going for is that intellectuals need to understand that they don't, in this case of what he called a traditional intellectual, they don't exist autonomously. They don't exist in a vacuum, standing above the institutions in which they exist, the social world, and looking down on it from, their beautiful ivory tower and, writing all of their, brilliant musings about the world. That intellectuals not only exist within and serve as a function of the social world, but that an organic intellectual is someone who understands their role in that social function, and then uses it as a means by which to, say, propagate a political ideology that furthers the people who also exist in a similar social function. So, and it's a really important part of what went on to, it works so perfectly with Williams, because it's a big part of someone who went on to influence Williams as well was a part of what I mentioned earlier, this movement of structuralism in European intellectual thought, which is this, to be very basic, structuralism is this idea that let me put it this way. A lot of the time when people critique like this sort of like imagined postmodern neo-Marxism or whatever, a lot of what they say is that they say that like post-structuralism or postmodernism or these types of, sort of like structuralism as well, or this theory, European theory, quote unquote, or continental philosophy in the 20th century is like removes meaning from everything. That it's this sort of like a nihilistic form of thinking, and that it removes the meaning of Western culture and Western values. Ergo, it's bad and we shouldn't support it, which is definitely not true. Especially in the case of the stuff that went on to influence a lot, like Terry Eagleton and Raymond Williams and the Marxist literary theory and Marxist cultural analysis. Oftentimes it's the opposite, because for structuralism, for example, and Louis Althusser, who went on to influence Raymond Williams as well as a lot of other thinkers, either on the left or on the sort of like the intellectual, like most popular intellectuals in the 20th century, or at least engaged with their thought, is this idea that like society functions similarly to the way that language functions. The structuralists picked up from Ferdinand de Saussure this idea that the meaning that we can, rather than all of these sort of like cultural symbols and signs like signifying this degeneracy that like removes all the value of like Western identities or whatever, in fact it is how we it is how we examine the way that human beings engage with these structures. It's the idea that like culture and the way that humans are constituted, what makes a human being is these countervailing forces between signifier and signified, something that is, and then how we define what that thing is. So like a word, and then how we define a word, for example. And that this is the way that human beings then engage with these various structures around them, that can then in turn and inform one another, Paul, as you were sort of describing, in this like constitutive and reconstitutive way over time and as things change. So really it's this idea that like Saussure like thought that culture exists in this, like the way that human consciousness works is this kind of like socio-biological kind of sphere, almost, is that the world, it like builds and informs and grows within the process of socialization, and that the way that we socialize is in part constitutive of the way that we sort of identify ourselves as human subjects, as people. I am who I am because I socialize, and I am in part constitutive of the things around me. And if we examine the relationship between these outer structures of society and the interiors of human beings, then we can find some sort of like context by which these ideologies are created and formed and present themselves. And so it's in part one, like shows the complexity of cultural studies and Marxist analysis. This is some of the like structuralism can be really, really tough reading sometimes.
Yeah.
But what it does is it shows that as we continue to sort of complicate and like use the toolkit of sort of Marxist inquiry that we've been talking about today to push further and further into the interiors of human beings, and then back out into the exteriors, and then back in this like constant mode of inquiry, just trying to figure out what things are, why they are, how they happen, what role human beings play, and in the interest of class politics, what role working class people play in all of this, and as a means for understanding how society functions. And so it shows to me like how necessary this kind of a thing is, and it's understandable why I know too many people who are smart and completely capable of doing tons of heavy lifting around this kind of a thing, especially with a little bit of work, but who see themselves as just like incapable of engaging in these spaces because it sounds incredibly complex, and it's because it is. But the thing is, the way that we're able to engage with, besides just elbow grease, stiff upper lips, and a little some hard work and some reading, is that we live in what constitutes all of the things that we are talking about, and we experience it all the time. In fact, as working people, we are like we're in the shit, for lack of a better term,
Yep.
of capitalist realism at any given point.
Oh,
And
yeah.
the things that are like constituted for these, like the coercive and controlling mechanisms of society, as well as the repressive and mediating mechanisms of society explicitly, are targeted toward us. And so with a little bit of investigation, just like organic intellectuals develop out of the fact that we exist within the social conditions that we're trying to be intellectuals in. It's rad. It's pretty badass.
It's pretty badass, and actually, I think it's a really, really important contribution to the Marxist canon, because I think that's probably one of the fair criticisms that could be, well, it could be sort of aimed at the, let's say, the Marxist-Leninist sort of Bolshevik model, is that it often would rely on sort of petty bourgeois intellectuals as being sort of the leaders of the vanguard, and you'd be trying to like convince the proletariat, but ultimately these were kind of like these petty bourgeois figures. I mean, obviously Lenin, Trotsky, and so on. Like these would have been very, very petty bourgeois sort of figures. I think there's also an overlap as well when we talk about like the Frankfurt School and that. If I'm not mistaken, a lot of the Frankfurt School characters would have been quite petty bourgeois or even bourgeois in their upbringings, and that may or may not have influenced their sort of the sort of conclusions that they would come to a little bit later on. But yeah, I think it's really, really important that we do incorporate this analysis of the organic intellectual and the proper the full realization of the proletarian in our analysis, because otherwise we're going to fall into a lot of the same traps that especially like the Marxist-Leninists organizations historically would have fallen into. And there's obviously a lot of work to be done there. Obviously, the Marxist-Leninist Maoists in particular probably have resolved a lot of those issues through things like Cultural Revolution, mass law, and stuff like that. But it is something that requires a little bit of work. Obviously, after we can get to it, we know that through, like, let's say a Marxist-Leninist program, a Marxist-Leninist party, we know that we can get to revolution. But after that moment has happened, we do see the falling into sort of revisionism and moving back towards capitalism as we move forward within that. And so yeah, absolutely centering the organic intellectual will be critical moving forward with that, Sorry, that was a complete ramble and a rant. I shouldn't have drank.
No,
before
like
this.
it makes complete sense, because like Gramsci's point was, Gramsci, as I said, was in many ways was kind of in that kind of Leninist mode of politics. But his point was like, who is going to be better at organizing and educating and persuading working class people? You don't necessarily need that external middle class Marxist Leninists coming into the factory floor and being like, hey, what you need to provide the means that allow working people to realize their own real relations, how those relations can be changed, and to realize their own political power. And
yeah, when you're writing under fascism, like it's a confrontation that's like really radical, right? The prison notebooks were written in prison, and it's like, why did this happen? Sorry to interrupt, but
no, I mean, it's like
completely right.
Gramsci was writing like in the space of 18 months in Italy while he was involved with the Communist Party of Italy. Italy went from being on the brink of a socialist revolution to fascists taking power. And it's like, if you're in that, like in the space of less than 2 years, you can be on the brink of like completely taking control of the country, giving workers controls of the means of production. There were colossal strikes, factory occupations, like running battles in the streets. And like, if you read his letters, if you read the letters that he wrote to his partner Tatiana, they're these, it's incredible how kind of hopeful and optimistic that he could be sometimes, where he'd be writing about how like, comrades have been arrested, I don't know if we're going to see them again, fascists keep raiding every meeting that we have, but we're selling like hundreds of thousands of copies of our magazines and newspapers. There are new meetings happening all the time. There's like this if anything, the problem was that he was kind of like possibly a little too optimistic about the potential of the situation that he was in at the time.
Yeah.
But if you want to understand like what the Marxist approach to culture is and why why Marxists think it's so important that we have a kind of clear understanding and program and a way of propagating, particularly working class education. You absolutely need to read the prison notebooks. Selections from the prison notebooks is what it's called in English. No full English translation exists yet. There is the selections, which are kind of editorially a little bit strange, and they have a kind of coherence that was never intended when they were written. But it's super useful. The section on intellectuals is really short. It comes right near the beginning of the book, and if it will kind of like really change the way that you think about how left politics and culture interact.
I would like to very quickly plug, if you're unfamiliar, prison notebooks it's a sort of labyrinthine text. It can be a little difficult, so I would encourage people to listen to the episode of Revolutionary Left Radio that discusses Gramsci and the prison notebooks. And well, it just so happens that John, frequent guest of Rev Left, Brett at me, DM me, was on to talk about Gramsci and did a great job. So,
amazing.
There's
amazing
a place
work.
to start. I would be able to just casually plug these things if it didn't make you uncomfortable, but it's got to be. Now it's funny.
Oh, screw you.
And that's on you. That's on you. I mean,
that's the culture coming through right there. Oh, brilliant. Fantastic. Listen, thank you so much. Before we push any further, just want to maybe take a couple of questions. There's a couple of questions I've had written down here for a little while. Maybe would you be okay with answering those before we push forward with this question?
Yeah, of course.
sure, go for it.
Great. Okay, so let me just take an older one, which was asked before we even actually got into addressing sort of Marxist cultural analysis. I can't actually pronounce the name. Haitch. Paul Marin. How is it possible for... Oh, actually, excuse me. I'm going to take... There was a question that this same person asked before this, so I'm going to ask their original question first. Paul Marin, where are the limits for analysing culture using Marxism? And there's an instant question. The limits.
That's a really good question. There's sometimes it's in not all some of the accusations against it in intellectual spaces, genuine good faith accusations, or sort of critiques of it, as well as some of the other ones. Not all of them are correct, in my opinion, necessarily, but some of them are very fair, and some of them are exaggerated. Like, well, one of them is an overemphasis on economism, as someone would say, which is like that in a way prioritizing production, like it exists as sort of like it offers more. It gives you answers as you're asking questions, regardless of the type of research that you're doing. That's one that I definitely don't agree with, and I think is addressed by later theories of particularly theories of Marxist cultural analysis that exist to integrate that. But I think that is a fair accusation against a certain type of Marxist inquiry into culture. And then I think the other one, one thing that's disadvantageous is that some elements of it, like we were talking about with the Frankfurt School, can sometimes, oftentimes, if not read correctly, which isn't always the fault of often is not the fault of the reader, but this stuff can be tough to read. Sometimes the scholarship itself or the interpretation of the scholarship can seem to be, also overly deterministic, but in a more pessimistic light, which is that they conceptualize hegemony or like the way like ideologies, stranglehold on people in a way that takes away from individual human agency and the expressions of that agency and subjectivity, which I also think you can address in some places. But it's a reason why Marxism is best thought of as not just like this evolving and changing, sometimes internally disagreeing sort of form of analysis that we can apply and use, but that also what is so useful about it is that when you apply it in application with other modes of inquiry, in cultural studies or literary theory or whatever, you find all of these other very interesting sort of helpful ways to integrate what would be seen as a Marxian perspective into other modes of inquiry and study. It's just sometimes hard to do. I don't know, John, if you have anything on this as well.
Yeah, I think I would completely agree. Like, those are two pretty valid criticisms. I mean, when you're talking about kind of pessimism, it just made me think about one of my favorite quotes from Raymond Williams, who I talked about earlier, which is that he said, "To be truly radical is to make hope possible rather than despair convincing."
Yes.
Raymond Williams there, the anti-doomer.
Need more of that.
Which is it's very often very tempting to kind of fall into simple kind of pessimist reductionism, or like economic determinism when it comes down to culture. And like, if we found out anything over the past like 100 years or so, it's that like that relationship is far more complicated. We need both the optimism of the will and the pessimism of the intellect that Gramsci wrote about. But like,
and well, that optimism is an extension of Rosa Luxemburg in a way, right? This sort of like the imperative of the question: socialism or barbarism? Would you say?
Yeah,
John?
yeah, and like if anything, like, our job is not to look at the kind of cultural landscape and go here is all the ways in which things are terrible.
Yes.
But to be able to look at it and go, here are the practices and ideas which provide hope for a better future. And what that means is an answer to that question of socialism or barbarism. Like, Marxist cultural analysis is not just kind of diagnostic and critical, but it is also kind of like aspirational. We're also putting forward a imaginative vision of what the world could look like. So I don't know what the limits of that are, though. I don't know how far that goes. I mean, I don't know if we've hit those limits yet. But the job of good Marxist cultural criticism is to be not just to make despair convincing, but is to make hope of a better world, to make hope of a socialist world a real and concrete possibility.
Powerful. Fucking hell. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Really, really appreciate that. Thank you so much, comrades. That was absolutely brilliant. One more question maybe, and then we can return to the main topic. Maybe we'll address some practical sort of illustrative examples of Marxist cultural analysis in action, and also I'm also conscious of the time here. We're sort of approaching the 2 hour mark, and I don't want to keep you here all night. I'm sure people are, and even the viewers are probably very curious. They're probably checking the elections right now, and they've got other matters to be attending to. But we'll just do a quick. We'll just touch on another question maybe, and then we'll return to the sort of the main topic here. Tankpunk asks, Paul, what were the Frankfurt schools and the New Left of the 1960s, and how did they differ from the old lefts? Another question tied to that. He also asks, I believe the Panthers were considered New Lefts. I just would say, what I would say is that tying the Black Panthers to the New Lefts it might be a little bit tricky. I mean, the Black Panther Party was pretty much just like an anti-revisionist Marxist-Leninist party. They call themselves Maoist, but not necessarily Maoist, of course, as we understand it now, as being Marxism-Leninism, Maoism, but more Marxism-Leninism, Mao Zedong thought, with anti-revisionism built into it. So yeah, I don't know. I would probably make a distinction between them and the New Left, which is more of kind of a liberal, more like a left liberalism that we saw like with the hippie counterculture and so on and so forth. Maybe loosely associated with like the anti-war movement and the counterculture and so on and so forth. But yeah, there might be worthwhile distinctions drawn out there. So just to repeat the question for John and for Kyle, what were the Frankfurt schools and the New Left of the 1960s, and how did they differ from the old left? So any thoughts on that?
Super complicated but really interesting question. because New Left gets used in a variety of different contexts, historically speaking.
Mm.
So, like in the context of the English left, what you've got is you've got the incident in Hungary, the Hungarian invasion by the Soviet Union, which causes a massive split in the Communist Party of Great Britain. A lot of the people that Kyle was talking about earlier, the Communist Party Historians Group, Communist Historian Party Group. No, which way is it? The CPHG?
CPHG.
Yeah, there we go.
Communist Party Historians Group.
A lot of
Worst
them,
name.
a lot of them, like including really big figures like E.P. Thompson, leave the Communist Party of Great Britain. Others like Eric Hobsbawm stay in the party, and so E.P. Thompson and quite a lot of other thinkers and like kind of academics and kind of leaders break and actually set up what eventually becomes the New Left Review, which is still a leftist magazine and political theory journal that is existing. So in that way, you can see a kind of break there. There's also a kind of break over in the States, which maybe Kyle can talk about a little bit as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's important that the New Left is constitutive of like a mishmash of a whole bunch of beliefs. To the point about the Panthers, I think what Paul said is both very true and also introduce the point well, that there, like, you could define like a capital New, capital L left, like, and that would still be a variety of groups, the European groups that John was talking about, as well as groups in the United States like the Students for Democratic Society, and the anti-war movement and the student campus movement in places like Berkeley. Figures like Mario Savio, like, they would be sort of considered part of that New Left. But then also in if you're sort of like not capital New, N and L New Left, if you think about the Black Panthers as not just a revolutionary formation, as an extension of anti-revisionist Marxist-Leninism, which totally agree with and is definitely true, with elements of like, with some splashy of Maoism, but not Maoism, and this almost in the same vein of the French Maoists. So one interesting topic, I think. But they were as well helped constitute the sort of turn toward decolonization that had like decidedly come by the time. Like, this is when like the Algerian War was underway and was wrapping up, and decolonization had happened and was still happening in the last little bit of it, and to the point where this is the reason why a lot of members of elements of the New Left, as well as a ton of Panthers, went to Algeria quite a bit in this period. So like, you could almost say that like there, if you consider the sort of the unification around the issues that constituted New Left groups, like the founding members of the New Left Review, as well, like, which included some like left libertarians like Raphael Samuel, as well as you think about the movements that emerged before and after the sort of the global uprising in 1968, but especially like a New Left being the situationists, as well as like how I mean, in 1968, like, shit popped off at Columbia in New York as well, and Berkeley and stuff. So there were these sort of like these sort of threads that connect themselves across these sort of new manifestations that exist most of the time outside of the the existing infrastructure of particularly the Soviet Union, not always like completely independent of it, but as a new iteration and interpretation of an expression of overlapping, often political ideologies in terms of liberation, but just with extensions added for decolonial anti-racist movements, the sort of like gender politics, and second and third wave feminisms that emerged out of this, and then the rise of liberatory queer politics as well. And so, yeah, complicated is a really good word, really good word for it.
Yeah.
The Frankfurt School exists sort of. I mean, the Frankfurt School, a lot of their writing, they had been writing way before this. And so by the time that they were entering in and this New Left was emerging, they were, getting like more than before. That was when I believe Habermas started actually guiding the Social Research Institute in the 1960s. So there had been all of these like sort of turns in scholarship and interaction and changes and stuff like in the Frankfurt School itself, as well as around them, that makes the term New Left a plural term. In it New Left as an idea is plural in that formal and informal new lefts, as well as within these new lefts there are various not necessarily competing always, but these various different iterations of various new lefts. So it's complicated, I guess.
I like that we both gave like the typical like academic answer. We're going, it's a great question. It's super complicated, and we don't really know.
We'll kind of dance around it a bit, but yeah. Well, I think that Marcuse didn't Marcuse play a pretty significant role in sort of mobilizing a lot of sort of like young hippies and stuff like that against. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Marcuse may have come into confrontation even with Ronald Reagan himself, actually, at one stage in the 1960s. I think when maybe not when he was president. I think maybe when he was governor or something like that. Was he governor? Maybe some other role. Anyway, I think it was in California. But if I'm not mistaken, Marcuse. I'm actually probably pronouncing that name really badly and super incorrectly.
No, that's right.
So. Marcuse. Okay, good. I can. Okay, but even if the information I'm saying wrong, at least I'm pronouncing it okay. That's the important thing. But yeah, didn't he used to do like these like he did like this really big like silent protest. There was like this silent protest of everyone. There's like a video you can see of it, and it's really interesting. And I haven't actually read One Dimensional Man. Have either of you read One Dimensional Man? I believe that was quite a mobilizing text for a lot of new leftists.
Like it was sort of like. So I guess that like if you want a historical analogy, it was like the capitalist Mark Fisher's capitalist realism for the like 1968 generation.
Class.
Yeah. That's what it was. It's like a super straightforward and very like engaging thing of like, here is a diagnosis of the society that you are all living in.
Yeah, alongside with like in the same way that the 68ers in France were influenced by the board, who we mentioned, and Henri Lefebvre's critique of everyday life, in this like sort of like grand criticism, like this grand critical space to make something up off the top of my head that that was influencing these sort of newer iterations, which like a new analysis of culture being a really big part of it, as well as Marcuse. I lost my train of thought. End of speech.
That's just me like all night, like the entire last 2 hours. I'm just like, next. Oh my god. Listen, brilliant. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Was there anything else that we really needed to address before we sort of applied a little bit of this and before we sort of wrap things up? I am conscious of time. Are the two of you able to stick around for another couple of minutes? I know we've kind of gone over time here. We'd said like an hour, which might become 2 hours, and it's now like 2 hours and 10 minutes. And
let's stick around for a little bit, and then we can wrap things up. Is that
okay?
Right, Kyle?
Yep. Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, cool. Well, let's pencil in like 20 minutes, and hopefully we can sort of wrap things up within that sort of time frame. Brilliant. So, was there anything else that we wanted to really highlight with regard to Marxist cultural analysis, or would you prefer to just dive right into actually demonstrating how this works with a couple of texts? We might touch on some horror movies, we might touch on some Marvel and some good stuff like that. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, let's just kind of dive in and talk about it. Like,
great.
Let's talk about horror movies for a second, because
let's talk about horror movies.
Hey,
oh, no.
This is now the Horror Vanguard stream.
Where's Ash?
Yeah, where is Ash?
I'm his replacement as another arty, tall white guy in the United States.
Your
So-
host. I mean,
so, like,
ghosts. Wait, no, it was the other way around. Ah, I botched it. Fuck.
This is why Ash is completely irreplaceable.
This is what we
and,
need, Ash. I fuck it up. Get the wrong way around.
So like something that we talk about on Horror Vanguard quite a lot is Gothic Marxism, which is like a Marxism which is attuned to something more than just a kind of like arid or really dry materialism, and takes into account things like social practices, social relations, kind of cultural detritus, the stuff that we often ignore. And horror is a really great site for that. It's often super profitable, but is often really critically not well regarded. And so you can use it as a really interesting site to do a lot of like historical and cultural analysis. Like we could obviously the kind of classic and really explicit metaphors of horror, you can find them in stuff like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which is made in the 50s and the 70s. And you've got like various Cold War panics or panics about Wall Street advertising and consumerism in there. They Live, the classic film from the 80s, is another like really explicitly political horror film. Toby Hooper's 70s classic, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, is a really interesting way of looking and thinking about capitalist consumption, deindustrialization, and the rise of neoliberal economics. So like even in these films, which are like considered like very low culture or not like serious art, you know, we don't need to turn to that to find stuff which is politically important. You know, we can turn to stuff which is kind of like marginal or transgressive or shocking in some way, and you can use that culture to not only understand the society and historical totality in which that text was made and produced, but also the way it's continued to kind of resonate and explain a contemporary situation. I'm pretty sure, Kyle, you would agree, but like anything you wanted to add?
I completely agree. I think I think when you are, at least I know that I grew up in such a way to where I was surprisingly aware. Well, not surprisingly, but that would be a long biography. But it was in an interesting way, very acutely aware of the distinctions between high and low culture. And I always found them to be kind of annoying and silly. And that is definitely expressed in the way that no one knows how to write about horror movies, it seems, particularly movie critics. But like, I find the transgressive, the grotesque, and the to be the point of some of the more uniquely crafted and sort of meaningful points of cultural analysis of when I've for as long as I've been doing this kind of a thing. So I've always been naturally attracted to horror, especially as a sort of a broad subset of like various with its own sort of broad subset of various subgenres or whatever. And I just in general, I agree. It gives us it allots us this very unusual space to like engage with the cultural world in a way that you don't get to do that often, because it's been sort of invaded by everyone's got there's too many like thumbs in the soup. Like there's too many cooks in the kitchen, like to really like show who did what. Like you can't really like, it's harder to draw threads when there's a whole bunch of stuff crowding the space. And so when anytime you engage in some more transgression, doesn't even have to be horror, doesn't even have to be something scary, just something that's normative to the sort of dominant discourses of culture in any time, place, or whatever, even if now it's acceptable, if it at one point in some point of historical contingency was considered to be on the outside of popular culture. It's going to be interesting when you engage with it in a variety of different ways. And at the end of the day, what I like the most about it is that it's really fun. It's just fun.
Yep.
I like weird shit, and I want to see the weird shit, and I want to talk about it. Like, That is it.
This is
That's
it.
what it comes down
And
to.
people would say with horror movies that oh well that's just it's just a metaphor. It's just like you just want to be scared for a bit, but it's like, yeah, okay, you can read them on that level, but also like horror can like affect the way that you look at the world, that you engage with it on an ethical and political level, I think. um we talked about this with Kyle on the show, talking in our longest ever episode about
Setting records.
about a Lindsay Lohan film
Oh,
called "I Know Who Killed Me," and it's really good. It's really interesting. It was critically panned because the traditional intellectual of capitalist culture only judges things in a very narrow spectrum of value, but because we are Marxist or leftist, we look at things with a more critical and insightful and historically grounded lens. And so, what we can do is we can take what capitalist culture sees as a failure because it's not profitable enough, or because it didn't win enough awards, or because it didn't get enough 5-star reviews, and we can go, actually, in here, there's something that's really popular that is speaking to something kind of real about people's political and understanding of a societal moment, and we can use that.
That's so interesting. And that's actually a point that I wanted to sort of discuss a little bit and to get your takes on. You've kind of spoken to it a little bit as well already. But my wife and I, right? We love more than anything to watch what what we acknowledge to be shit horror films. Like if we look at like Rotten Tomatoes or like something like that and it says like 16%, we're just like, yes, that's gonna be fucking great. But this is so interesting because we watched like because we tried watching a rom-com recently. We tried watching that we watched that Holiday. It's on Netflix. Netflix are really fucking grasping at straws now, by the way. With COVID and everything, I don't think there's enough good movies coming in, so they're just like, fuck it, we'll just take anything in. So we watched this film called Holiday, and the critical scores for it, the results for it were like really, really high, amazing. And it's just one of these standard rom-coms, very heteronormative, really reinforces a lot of the cultural values that we have. People love that, gets a really, really high score, so on and so forth. Then we'll watch something that's like a horror, and it's like this horrific masterpiece. And like we're always unbelievably shocked and surprised when we look at the critical ratings of it, the scores of it, and so on. It's like 20%, 30%, 40%. Like a really, really good horror film, you'd be lucky to get like 60% approval of it. And I think that really relates back to a lot of what we're talking about in terms of like cultural materialism and how this sort of reinforces the economic base and all these sorts of ideas and stuff like that. So you've kind of touched on that a little bit, and how like as Marxists we can kind of sort of understand these things on a very different level to maybe like the popular critics might understand it as. Although when I say it out loud like that, I realize that I sound like an absolute pretentious dickbag. So
Hey, welcome to my world.
So I apologize for that.
It's just academia. Like, we did that to your stream. We're here. Like, this is unfortunately our cross to bear.
Oh no, no. It sounds good. It sounds convincing. It sounds believable and viable. When you said, I sound like I don't know. I feel like I sound like a pretentious dickbag, like I'm from like a Monty Python film or something like that. Like the anarcho-syndicalist from like Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Come see the violence inherent in the system. Anyway, but yeah, no. I hope he's got that reference.
They were Eurocoms.
Eurocom. Fucking Eurocom.
They were basically council communists, it sounded like.
Fucking council communist. Oh my god. Anyway. Yeah, but no, I do think this is a really, really interesting point to address. Why is it that like all horror as a genre is so like reviled by people, and like we still kind of love it as well in a strange way, and we kind of love to hate it, and people will watch films that are like even films will say they're like are like critically supported, like Hereditary got like incredibly high results, or high, excuse me, what can I say, like I got like 5 out of 5. It got like high praise reviews
yeah,
from everybody, But even then, like people really just want to like shit on it. You know, like people just really want to lay into horror, and I think that might be interesting, like from a Marxist perspective, and I think that you two fine comrades might have some, and Ash as well from Horror Vanguard as well. I think would have some very interesting things to say about this. So do you wanna maybe talk about that a little bit more, and to talk about why that might be?
Yes, and I am gonna rant for a moment.
Please.
One of the big things Mark Fisher wrote about was the delibidinization of culture, right? Well, what that means is like he talks about this idea of like libidinal potential, this idea that like culture could do more than just like satisfy you for 2 hours whilst you're in the cinema, but it could actually inspire you to change how you live. He talks about this a lot in the context of a lot of like punk and post-punk music from the 70s and 80s, and in the concept of what he called popular modernism. So it's like popular culture, but it has that kind of modernist idea of like being really challenging, being super like intellectually engaged, and actually kind of like provoking a response from the audience. Um, and one of the kind of markers of capitalist realism, he said, it was like culture is basically sort of like soporific, and what we need is we need a return to this kind of like popular modernism, culture which is not nostalgic but is forward looking, thinking beyond capitalism, and actually is kind of provoking us to do some kind of hard critical work when we encounter it. People think that culture should be easy, but he was like, no, culture should be popularly appealing, but that doesn't mean it has to be like basic or really straightforward. We can have culture that's challenging and interesting. And like a lot of criticism in its mainstream forms just tends to go, well, here is the thing that is good, and here and here is the thing that's bad. And that's what being a critic is about. That's what being a film critic is about. But like good criticism is about going, actually, here's what this work of art does, and here's what it might actually do to you if you engage with it. Here's how it might actually change you in some way. Something we say on HV a lot is that horror wants to do things to your body. It wants to provoke responses from you, um, and and some of those things are about kind of fear, but some of them can be about changing how you see the world. I will stop ranting now.
Powerful rants. Oh my god, that dog is amazing. I love the dog.
Sorry,
Kyle, your dog is great.
that's on my end.
Comrade Bow Wow. I'm sorry, I love dogs
just
so
put
much.
the quotation marks around everything John said, and I'll let that serve in terms of John's the Gothic Marxism, the horror guy. This is this is John's like academic concentration, like the instant like getting it from places where this is sort of designated to study. So it carries a lot of weight, not just because we don't give a fuck, neither of us do, about the institutions by which we're credentialed or the amount of education that we have. What we care about is that there are pretensions that act as barriers for ordinary people to engage in what are seen as these like high echelon demarcations in education and culture and this sort of a thing, and that those are false frameworks. It's bullshit. It's not real. What often is a problem, not to get too Marxist here, this is definitely not the stream for it, is that there's a lack of means by which people can engage in those spaces, because just like working people are busy, working, and don't have a lot of free time to engage in intellectual activities because we don't value them. Like capitalism doesn't value them because oftentimes they're not profitable. So there isn't a robust public space for intellectual growth like there should be. Instead, we have museums, and I'm a historian, so I'm a big fan of a good museum. Like we've got all of this stuff, and a lot of it is public, but it should be 100 times it, because we have, not only do we have enough money and resources to do that in a way that's equitable and accessible for everyone, but it's an imperative for a well-examined and executed society is that we have the means by which we can interrogate, critique, and explore and celebrate culture regardless of pretensions and demarcations that are constructed by bourgeois assholes. We deserve the space to express ourselves and to figure out what this expression means and how it makes us human beings. Um, Almost this sort of like, art as like not leisure, but art as expression, and expression as existing, like as something that's formulated to lift from Marx outside of the process of laboring, and that then in turn informs the laboring. So
Yeah.
our creativity, our ability to express ourselves are being constrained by our social conditions. And so those of us who are professional nerds should do our best to engage as much as we can as organic intellectuals to further the interests of working people, because working people deserve culture too.
Hell. Yeah.
And
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah, I'm powerful. It's actually something that actually kind of hits me. Like it actually probably hits me because I was someone who would have really liked to have gotten involved in academia, to do a PhD and all this sort of stuff. But actually, just economically, I wasn't able to. I actually just like it wasn't financially a viable path for me. I literally just hit up against a wall because it just wasn't possible. I had an advisor and all lined up, but I couldn't get like the funds to actually make that happen, and so I found that incredibly disheartening and disillusioning, and that so I wanted to move in this direction, developing intellectually and all these sorts of things, and I just didn't, I suppose, have the avenues available to me financially, and I think a lot of people have this problem as well. Like a lot of people all over the world. I think it's probably a lot worse in the Americas as well. I think the college fees, people go into like student debt for like decades, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm still working through school. I understand how you feel, Paul. I'm people in my family don't really go to college, and so it took me until I got my undergraduate degree when I was like 26, which is still pretty good.
Yeah.
And then I took a few years off, and then I worked, and I'm getting a master's degree any day now. When I decide I want to finish it, and then that's what I've managed so far, and it's absolutely taking on debt has been a part of this.
Yeah.
And it's made things a lot fucking harder than they had to be, especially during undergrad, where like I think there's people online who probably, because I talk about it a lot, but this is why I care about undergraduate students and their conditions so much, as well as graduate students, is because all precarious workers at universities.
Yep.
Because it really was like I worked like crazy in school because I could just get service jobs. So I had to piece a bunch of those together. And then I did a little student government, which paid me a little bit. And so that was a third job. And then there's like all of this, like, it was much harder than it had to be to get an education. And like, I don't toot my horn too much, which is, but that's partially on me. But overall, I like to personally think that I'm someone who like has the abilities and has just always had the interest and the motivations to make a space in like an intellectual sphere and can figure out a way to do so that benefits the greater public. But the fact that capitalist economies place such constraints on the abilities of working and the access of working people to institutions exactly like higher education means that it's just like you're always on like defense.
Yeah.
Like, so you're just, the chances are lower. It's always harder. And we just like it becomes harder for those of us who like exist as also like subversive. We are subversive elements whether we realize it or not in universities. John is, I am, we all are, by virtue of our like either not capitulating to the dominant discourses and ideologies of the neoliberal university, or by just by virtue of our position as people who have imagined a horizon further than that of neoliberal education and capitalist neoliberalism, something much more equal, fairer, something that is just going to be better for all of us, rather than the very cruel, uncaring, profit-hungry system that we have in front of us. End of speech.
Yeah, like this is the important point, right? This is why we should kind of care about this, which is that nothing is too good for the working classes. Like all of the resources of culture, of knowledge, of intellectual life are absolutely what working people are entitled to. And it is stuff which is deliberately kept from them by the institutions of traditional intellectual work. And so, this is why things like the Working Men's Educational Association in England was so important. This idea of trade union education, such a vital thing, because like if the access to culture is mediated by institutions which are embedded in capitalist hierarchy and are exclusionary, well, the answer is that we should and will make our own.
Yep.
Hell feckin' yes, absolutely. And we come back to the organic intellectuals and our own sort of, I suppose, dual power structures, working against these systems, creating our own educational institutions. And and I suppose it sort of presents a lot of pathways forward for us and presents a more hopeful future as well. So there's a lot to be taken away from this, I think, which is quite optimistic and hopeful.
Education in capitalism. That sounds like a good subject for our next stream with Paul, John.
It really does, right?
Taken over again. I'll just like slip out to the bathroom like within the first 5 minutes. I'll let you take over for about 2 hours and then come back. Oh, absolutely brilliant. Come here to me. I know we're at like 2.5 hours here. I just want to check. Was there anything else that we wanted to discuss with regard to Marxist cultural analysis or illustrating how this sort of works in practice? Was there anything else we want to wrap up with, like in terms of that sort of, sort of the meat of the conversation and so on and so forth, before we sort of like wrap up and do outros and plugs and all that sort of stuff, or are we sort of good to go? What do we think?
I think we hit pretty much everything we wanted to talk about this time around. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to end on endorsing Paul's stream.
Oh, come on.
YouTube channel. And the speech.
How dare you? Oh my god! I'm just slowly sort of like falling into my chair, just slouching further and further. It was amazing.
You brought me
I don't regret
your house.
Oh my god, it was absolutely amazing. Comrades, thank you so much for coming on. It's been absolutely fantastic. The two of you have added so much to the conversation. It's been hugely educational, edificational, we might even say as well. Really, really brilliant. I've learned so much. The two of you have so much knowledge. It's really, really incredible. People in the chat, seriously, go subscribe to their channels straight away. Go check out the Horror Vanguard podcast as well. You'll find a link to that in the description box below this right now. It absolutely amazing, incredible work that all the comrades are putting out, and serious, genuine, organic proletarian intellectuals. So go and check that out right away. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been absolutely brilliant. I'll do a quick shout out to the people in the chat, and then I'm going to ask the two of you to do just maybe a few plugs, where people can find you, upcoming work, and so on and so forth. Just before that, I do want to say thank you to the people in the chat here. Thank you to Saber, who's coming on Friday. By the way, on Friday we're going to be talking about Afrofuturism and how Europe underdeveloped Africa. Going to be really, really interesting. So Saber's coming on to do that. It's going to be fantastic. By the way, subscribe to Saber's channel as well. Fantastic stuff there. Just released a new video. Really, really interesting. Socialist Swan, Comrade Roman, Damon Garcia, subscribe. Ian McShay, HBG, I can't pronounce that name, AITCHBE, The Partisan, Frank Lopez, Jessidiah, Ben Toth, Sydney Rika, Socialist Swan, M. Bergstrom, Blue Jean, and who else can I see there? Courses audio. I think that's pretty much it. And I apologize if I've missed anyone there. Juche Necromancer as well. Juche Necromancer and Tankpunk as well. Thank you so much, comrades. Really. Oh, and I see the Licorice guy has slid into the chat there as well. So like a double shout out there to comrade John. Okay, brilliant. Listen, thank you so much, comrades. Just before we wrap things up, do you want to tell people where they can find your work? And I mean your work broadly as well. Let's get started. Maybe we'll start with John, and then we'll do Kyle, just sort of the reverse of the intro here. So John, where can people find your work? Do you have anything upcoming that you'd like to sort of guide people towards?
Well, I wanna plug Kyle's work first.
Fuck you.
So wholesome.
Fuck you.
I'm fucking dying. Oh my god, I got diabetes. It's so sweet.
Go sub to his Twitch for some of those good gamer pills.
Amazing.
Go and watch his video essays. I really like his one on the Outer Worlds. It's super good.
You did one on the Outer Worlds. I'm sorry,
Yeah,
I just started playing the Outer Worlds, and I'm really I didn't realize that you'd released something on it. That's amazing because it's really
That
like
was my
anti-capitalist.
that was my first gamer vid.
Oh my god,
actually.
I need to go.
Started it all.
It's really good.
I'm
And
so
go
excited
follow him
about
on Twitter. He's
amazing.
super smart and just a great writer, great educator, and someone you should follow.
Champion of the people.
So I'm just gonna plug you now, asshole. John's great. My very good friend, the Litcritguy, who I'm lucky to get to talk to frequently and collaborate with on a bunch of stuff, can be found at the Litcritguy on Twitter, where he posts great theory takes. He also has a Patreon where he writes these sort of theoretical introductions, these primers, if you will, to various thinkers on the left that are very useful because I've seen them and read them. We collaborated on a video that he had mentioned earlier that I'm still really proud of. John did a great job picking out some sources of political philosophy for inspiration, and then on he wrote the body of the essay really, and it's on writing. That's a good video. I liked his Son of Dracula is pretty good too. And I also recently, to switch back and be selfish, I recently, just a couple days ago, made a video that's just a very brief introduction to some concepts we discussed today, mostly found in Guy Debord's Society of the Spectacle. And it was for Halloween, and then it came out November 2nd because it took me longer, as it always does. And that video also features John's co-host on his podcast, Ash, who did an incredible job. It is kind of spooky, just as a warning. Disturbing is the word that was disturbing, is what several people have said, and I'm like, thank you. Nailed it.
That's what we're going for.
Yeah, I think that'll do it.
Amazing. Lads, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on. I've learned so much. I hope the people in the chats and the audience who've watched this for all this time have gotten a lot out of it. I'm sure they have. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to the next time you take over the stream. I'm sure. Well, I'm sure it won't be very long. It'll definitely be in the upcoming future at some point. And thank you so much for giving your Wednesday to me. I really appreciate that. And again, thank you so much, Kyle, as well. I know this very exciting day in the United States. Well, exciting. I don't know. Maybe exciting is a very optimistic word to be used. it's definitely an interesting day. Yeah, we can definitely say that. And thank you very much for I suppose giving your attention to the subject, which is fairly distant and far removed from the interesting stuff that's going on at the moment. So thank you so much, comrades. We're going to end it there. Do you remember at the start of the stream I was like, oh no, I don't know how I'm going to end these streams. I don't. So do either of you two have like a good slogan, like a really good slogan that we can end it? Like you can just say some like really cool, catchy slogan, and then I can click end stream. Does anyone have a good one?
Well, there is the way that we end every episode of Horror Vanguard.
Take it over.
Which is thank you so much for listening, and remember, everybody, stay spooky.
Stay spooky.
Stay spooky.
Absolutely amazing. Brilliant. Thank you very much, everybody. Stay spooky. I can't. I still feel awkward. I do need to do this. Solidarity, comrades. I can't help myself. All right, cheers, everyone. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your week. I'll see you again. I'm releasing a new video tomorrow, and I'll have another stream on Friday. Thank you very much, everybody. Lots of love. Stay spooky, solidarity, and all that good stuff. Cheers, everyone. Take care. Bye bye. This is like the Irish thing where like you say goodbye about a